Welcome to the Hibs Observer Monday morning briefing with myself, Liam Bryce and Patrick McPartlin. Just to review Saturday's Scottish Cup win over Forfar and how we look ahead to Wednesday night's big Premiership clash against Rangers. Looking back over Saturday's game a wee bit later than we intended, so apologies for that, folks. But by the time we were finished with post-match presser stuff on Saturday, it was unfortunately it was closing time at Station Park, and we had to make our way back down the road after a 1-0 victory for Hibs. Patrick, I don't know if you want to join me in maybe making a wee promise to our subscribers that after this next maybe 20-25 minutes, we'll never speak of that 90 minutes again.
Yes, agreed. Deal.
It wasn't. I mean, it was job done, which is what it's all about on these days. You know, you just need to get yourself through to the next round. Forget about it. But it was a hard watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think you look at games like, pitting Premiership opposition against lower league sides. We saw it with Aberdeen and Darvel. We nearly saw it with Spartans and Hearts just before the Forfar Hibs game. That they can be banana skins. There's it's not often that every single Premiership team, when paired with a team that's several places below them in the pyramid, is going to end up in a sort of 5 or 6-0 victory for the big team, as it were. But yeah, as you say, the main thing is getting through these games and getting into the hat for the next round. But I mean, it was just. It wasn't great, I think, for a lot of reasons. I mean, Hibs played like a team that was missing sort of 9 or 10 potential starters. Certainly played like a team that hadn't played a competitive match in the sort of best part of 3 weeks. And in all honesty, I thought Forfar were very unlucky, not to get anything from it. I mean, at least take it to extra time. They obviously had a flurry of chances early on and hit the post, I think, after about 3 minutes. Yeah. And I think that really should have been a wake-up call for Hibs, and it wasn't. I think they rode their luck time and time again, even when they got the penalty. It's well struck enough, but it's a good save from Mark McCallum. And I think it was when that happened. Doubt starts to set in. Can Hibs actually get through this, or is this going to be, yet another sort of infamous defeat by lower league opposition in a cup tournament? And there's been a lot of them in recent history. But yeah, I think just the conditions can't have helped, and you're playing against a team that's really got nothing to lose. And you look at their previous form, you look at 4 wins in the league and in League Two, points for nothing. These cup games could always go like anyway. And you look at the wind was swirling around. It's a tight pitch. It's artificial, and they're not excuses for the players. But I think a lot of elements probably combining to make it a sort of really difficult day at the office for Hibs. And obviously Christian Doidge's second half header the difference. But obviously I think we'll talk about the Inverness away game a little bit later. But that's potentially another iffy game for Hibs, another one that they could come unstuck if they're not.
It's a horrible tie, isn't it? Yeah. It's a stinker. I mean, I just kind of agree with pretty much everything you said there about Saturday. Wasn't great, but these ties, they're very rarely a walkover. It's for all the reasons you've sort of listed there. A team that are going to be right up for a tight pitch, weather conditions not great. Not a competitive game for a few weeks. It's all these kind of wee elements that, and obviously the amount of players missing, they just add up just to kind of just make it that bit more, dodgy. I think was the word I used in the match report. That this, as soon as the draw came out, it just felt like an extremely dodgy one for Hibs, regardless of Forfar's previous form. But I think within that, you can still give maybe a better account of yourselves. I think it was just a really kind of uninspired stuff, I thought, in the first half. Obviously, it's difficult to get, through those, 2 banks of 4 or 5, whatever it was, and it's you need to be patient in these games. There is an element of that required, because I think what managers will tell the players is to don't panic if you don't score in the first half of these games. Teams of that level will tend to tire as it goes on. The openings will come, and they sort of, to an extent, they eventually did. Not to a great deal, but I think Nick Montgomery was probably justified in his half-time anger, which he he didn't quite go in depth on with us, but he certainly alluded to it. He said, "I'm glad you weren't standing outside the dressing room door." And see, to be fair, I mean, you were that close to the dressing rooms in the press box there. I think if we'd all stopped and listened, we could have probably heard every word of it. But there was a real frustration building around in the first half. I think obviously it's where maybe having the 3,000 away fans maybe actually doesn't help Hibs in a sense, because the guys are right on top of them. Some of the people around us were getting really, really frustrated. There was a lot of boos at half time. I think there was actually more boos for the half time whistle than there was cheers when Christian Doidge's goal went in. So it's one like obviously Hibs have gotten through, and that's all that really matters at the end of the day when it comes to the cup. But I think when people travel and they expect a wee bit more, and it's just it's always a bit harsh to say that teams should then go out and beat one of the Old Firm afterwards. But I think it needs to be a kind of a much improved performance when it comes to Rangers on Wednesday night. But we could maybe talk a wee bit about Christian Doidge. He spoke after the game. Obviously, he's into the last 6 months of his contract now, and he's been asked about it before, hasn't he? His future, and he was a wee bit kind of didn't really give too much away, and he wasn't making any sort of definitive judgments either way on Saturday. But I mean, there was still a wee bit of an element of if suggesting that if he's not going to get the game time that he's looking for, that he might look to move on. Obviously, we don't know at this point if Hibs are going to put a new contract on the table for him. He said there's been no concrete discussions at this point, maybe just kind of wee informal talks here and there. So I don't know, where do you see that one winding over the next few months, Patrick?
It's an interesting one, because when he's been asked about his contract situation before, or not so much his contract situation, but when he wasn't playing so much, and obviously had that loan spell at Kilmarnock, and he's been very kind of his typical footballer answer. It's like, I'm not thinking about that just now, or we can deal with that in the future. But I felt the tone had changed a little bit when he was speaking on Saturday after the game. He was very, very honest about having to look after himself and pointing out that it is a short career, and that really, if he's not going to get the required game time, then he would look to move on. I think it's really the first time that he's actually said about moving on, because he's said repeatedly how much he loves it at Hibs. The sort of club, the players, the city, everything. Obviously, because his fiance is up here as well. So that makes like a big difference. And I think that it's a difficult one as well, because he obviously went from being like looking totally out of the picture under Lee Johnson, and has that spell with Kilmarnock. But then, as he says, he came back and he just really wanted to knuckle down and I suppose just kind of prove that he still had something to offer. And I think he's up to like 5 goals for the season at the moment, and I think he does offer something different to what Hibs already have up front. And it's just whether or not, if everyone's fit, if they have a full complement of players, is he going to be playing as much? He's obviously, I think he's really the only kind of main kind of focal point that Hibs have in attack, the sort of aerial. I know he's not the tallest, but he is quite good in the air, and I don't think Hibs really have anything else like that in the team. And I think he's just that kind of striker who, he's in the box, he'll get on the end of things. The goal at Station Park wasn't a thing of beauty. I think he'd be the first to say that, and a certain element of goalkeeping error as well.
Yeah.
That helped him out. But he's just that sort of striker who kind of gets something on loose balls in the box. And I think we've said this in a previous call, but he's the only Hibs sub to come off the bench and actually contribute with a goal in Montgomery's time at the club, which I think is, admittedly it was a consolation goal against Celtic at Parkhead. But there is obviously there's a player in there, and I know there was a time when he just maybe didn't look sort of at full strength. Obviously, I think he was suffering with injuries. I think he had COVID for a spell as well, which he spoke about how much that had taken out of him. But just in terms of the contract situation, I think there are a few players out of contract in the summer, big players. Paul Hanlon, Lewis Stevenson, David Marshall, Doidge. And Jimmy Jekyll's another one, players who are sort of playing quite regularly. And it feels like any time you ask Nick Montgomery about this, then it's very much kind of kicking the can down the road, like, I will deal with that later. And I just wonder whether, and this makes sense, and I think this has probably been an issue for Hibs in previous seasons, that they've maybe looked to get business done a little bit too quickly in terms of offering new contracts. Whereas, if they can wait and sort of like push it down the road as far as they can and then see what else is available, how other players perform, what becomes a possibility in terms of recruitment, who might come in. I mean, Nick Montgomery said himself on Friday that the nature of the January transfer window alone, you can think that a deal's done on the Monday, and then by the Tuesday it's off because something unforeseen has happened, like the selling club or the other club has problems getting in a replacement, or the player decides to go elsewhere. So I think it is probably worth kind of seeing what sort of transpires over the remainder of the season. I certainly think Doidge has something to offer, but at the same time, Hibs might be keen to offer him sort of like a new deal on reduced terms, or just a new deal. But again, if he doesn't think he's going to be playing that much, then it might not make a difference. No matter how much he loves the club, he might be looking to move on. And he's been at the club for nearly 5 years, and I think I just couldn't help but feel when he was talking on Saturday that the tone had changed a little bit. I just wonder whether there is almost like a kind of feeling of all good things must come to an end, and he's maybe got half a mind on moving on. So it'll be an interesting one to see how that sort of pans out over the remainder of the season, because I do think he has something left to offer to the team. But whether or not Montgomery agrees, or if it actually if he is able to contribute to the level that they would want him to, I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, because as you say, he was quite, I thought he was very relaxed discussing it. Sometimes when players get asked these questions and they can kind of understandably sort of clam up a wee bit, but he was kind of just a wee bit, what will happen. Quite open and saying that I need to be playing, and that'll probably be the deciding factor. If he's been told, we're not offering you a contract, so obviously you need to go somewhere else, or as you say, maybe reduced terms and a reduced role. And I don't know. When I say reduced role, I don't know if he'd be willing to accept anything that's more bit part than he kind of already has been this season. You've got to imagine, that Dylan Vente will be back in to play Rangers. Obviously, Adam Lafondra to come back. Nick Montgomery's he's taken to playing Martin Boyle through the middle quite a lot, and obviously, he's got to come back into the squad as well. So, I mean, I really do agree that he offers something completely different to everybody else, and he touched on that himself on Saturday. That he's quite confident and quite secure in the knowledge that I can bring something to this team that nobody else quite can. And it's just, I think if we're getting towards the summer and we don't know how the rest of the season is going to go, if we're maybe getting into that time, and there could be a feeling that Hibs need a sort of significant reset in terms of personnel, and I feel like he could potentially be one of the guys who in other circumstances might stay, but if the manager feels that he needs a big overhaul in the summer, then he might be one of the ones I think who are, I don't think sacrificed is the right word, but just as a knock-on effect of that, becomes one of the ones that moves on. And he's clearly very relaxed about it, and I feel like there are still probably plenty of Premiership teams who would take a punt on a Christian Doidge, just in terms of his attributes. He's a type of player that would fit the way that a lot of Premiership teams like to play. They like to play with a guy who can hold the ball up, who can provide a bit of a physical presence, and kind of chip in with goals, even if not absolutely prolifically. Although he does have a very good record in the Scottish Cup, he seems to really enjoy playing in the Scottish Cup. Just before maybe we move on to Rangers, I actually meant to mention this earlier. It was the set pieces on Saturday. That was the biggest kind of source of terror for everybody of a Hibs persuasion inside the Station Park. And it actually got to the point I noticed where whenever Forfar had the opportunity to put the ball in the box, that Hibs took to not leaving anybody up the park whatsoever. It was everybody back in the box, and I think if it was Doidge that cleared one off the line, and I think certainly if it wasn't for Paul Hanlon, who I thought was pretty good, he's kind of probably one of the few to get pass marks from the game on Saturday. If it wasn't for Paul Hanlon, I think Forfar probably would have scored from one of those. It was kind of seat of the pants stuff at times, wasn't it?
It was, and to be fair, this is nothing new. I mean, anyone who's been watching Hibs for the past however many years knows that if you want to cause absolute mayhem in the Hibs box, then just launch everything in there: corners, throw-ins, free kicks, goal kicks. Just basically get the ball in there and sort of sit back and watch absolute chaos ensue, and then hope you can get a toe on something. And you can point to the wind. I mean, you could see the ball swirling around on Saturday, but it's not an excuse. I mean, even when there's no wind, it still seems to be this sort of like this huge problem area for Hibs. And I know that obviously there's maybe not been the centre back recruitment that the club's needed in recent years, and we've discussed this before, that it's like a real issue that the club is now in the tougher of the two transfer windows, with basically three sort of senior centre backs, one of whom is a 20-year-old on loan, the other, one of whom is currently on international duty, and with Riley Harbottle sort of seemingly out the pitch. I mean, Jacob Blaney was on the bench on Saturday, but I don't know whether that was down almost to necessity, because it was a small bench. There was there wasn't a lot of beef in that Hibs squad in terms of like numbers and availability. So once again, it's the January transfer window, and Hibs are kind of scrapping around for one, maybe two centre backs. And I mean, I think I like Will Fish. I think he's a good player. I think he's sometimes forget that he is only just 20 and he's not played a lot of senior football. But I did think he was quite poor on Saturday. I think he would probably think that himself. He certainly had better games this season, and as you say, like Paul Hanlon, I think did sort of, it was a Paul Hanlon performance where it was a kind of solid 6-7 out of 10. But Hibs really need a big commanding centre half in there, ideally a kind of left-sided one. Just someone. I mean, I've seen on social media recently, see people talking about Rob Jones, John Hughes, even just centre halves who will just sort of command the back line, roar at the other defenders, and really just sort of make sure that the team is just not so susceptible to set pieces. I mean, Forfar must be wondering how they didn't get anything out of any of those set pieces, because I mean, it looked like every time they sort of threw a ball in there, it was just panic stations. And again, this is something that it's been an issue for Hibs for a long time. Whether it's crosses coming in, whether it's it's just there is some sort of curse on the Hibs defence that situations like that they just panic. And I'm sure Montgomery and the coaching staff will be aware of that, and I'm sure that's something they'll be keen to stamp out. I mean, they need to, obviously, but I suppose that's also why I mean, I know Hibs signed Mizian Melida as a kind of forward, and everyone's going, hang on a minute, we need reinforcements at the back first. But I think it's such a specialised role playing centre half in a Nick Montgomery team. And as he said, you need people who can hit the ground running. You need people who are essentially better than what you've got, if possible. So I mean, it's January the 22nd. The end of the window is kind of bearing down on us quite quickly. But you'd imagine that if centre backs are going to be brought in, then they have to be able to come in and make an impact. They have to, essentially like Will Fish, I suppose. They have to be able to come in and just sort of really improve that defence, because it's one thing looking at in terms of league form that Hibs have scored, I think, the most goals outside Celtic and Rangers. Like nobody else has scored more goals than sort of Hibs outside of the sort of Glasgow 2. And that's great, but when you look at how many they've conceded, I think there's only two teams that have conceded more, and so that's it kind of tells you where the problems lie. And January is not the time to completely solve that issue, but you could certainly shore it up a bit, certainly put a stick and plaster over it until the summer, and then that's when you can possibly look at kind of overhauling it a bit more and bringing in players who, are potentially going to be at the club for the longer term rather than just, what is likely to be a kind of short-term loan if they're brought in this window. So, yeah, I think for the sort of general sort of good health of Hibs fans and probably Nick Montgomery as well, they do need to do something about the defence, something quite drastic. But I don't, it's obviously not a case that the club's not working on it. It's just, I think it's probably reassuring that the club is sort of taking time to try and find the right characters to come in, rather than just sort of saying, well, we'll take this player because he's available and hope for the best, which I think has probably happened in the past. And there's Luke Amos obviously is on trial as well. He's not a centre back, but he is a kind of defensive-minded midfielder, and even that could make a difference. Having a player in there just to kind of protect the back four a little bit, who can also kind of drop deep and act as an auxiliary centre half when the full-backs are pushing on. But I mean, however they solve it, it needs solved, because I mean, if a team third bottom of League Two can do that to Hibs, then teams in the Premiership are going to have an absolute field day, and that must be a big concern. And I know it wasn't a sort of first choice Hibs 11. I know there were a lot of players missing, but the fact is that even when it is as much the strongest team as possible, it's still an issue. It's still a problem. And I think Saturday just really illustrated how much of an issue it is, and how important it is that it's sorted sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Wednesday night will be an altogether different kind of test. Maybe not as many kind of long balls being launched into the box, but you are, coming up against the sort of, as it stands, the second best side in the league. I know Rangers as well. If they've not had their injury problems to seek, but I think depth of squads and stuff. It's not really. I don't think their plight is quite as comparable to how short Hibs are in bodies at the moment. So it's obviously a big ask on Wednesday night to take a result off them. They've been going really well under Philip Clement, to be fair. But how do you see that panning out Wednesday night?
It's tough to say, really, because you look at the performance against Forfar and think, well, if they play like that, then it's going to be if Rangers are on top form, then it is going to be sort of pretty grim viewing. But I think if you get back to Easter Road, you've got a big home crowd behind you, and you kind of know what to expect. I mean, obviously, clubs, Hibs do the try that again. Hibs do their analysis on their opposition, obviously, but they'll be more than aware of what Rangers can do, and that presumably helps them sort of set up to deal with it. You've also got got players coming back. I think I wouldn't be surprised to see Kanayo Egg was starting at right back rather than Rory Whittaker. I think that's probably a cert, actually. And I'm not just getting cocky because I said that Rudy Milotnikov was due to start at the start of the game. I'm not like that. But I think you can also see Jordan Peter coming back in at left back. I thought Hibs looked much better when he came on against Forfar. Just that kind of just like attacking threat, just tidy on the ball, just sort of a bit of a calm head, and obviously necessitated Lewis Stevenson moving to right back and somehow putting in possibly the best cross of his career, which I'm still. I mean, I don't think we talked about that enough at the time, but it was.
It went a wee bit under the radar, that didn't it?
It was. It did, and it's one of the sort of few bright spots I think from what was all round a particularly forgettable day at Station Park, and some of us didn't even get a Brady. So,
No, did not. All that way to not get a Brady.
But anyway, they're not letting it get to us. But I think it will be a different team that lines up against Rangers, and I think we'll see Dylan Vente coming back. Maybe even, I don't think he would start him, but provided the paperwork comes through in time, then I would imagine that Mizani Mauriga probably be right for some game time, maybe sort of 15, 20 minutes. He's obviously been playing. He's not played. I think his last competitive game was just before Christmas, so he has had like a month off. But in terms of fitness, I think you've got nothing to lose by throwing him in for 15 to 20 minutes, because there will be players back, but at the same time, Hibs are still short of so many players. The ones away on international duty, and the injured players who I don't think we're expecting any of them to come back in time for Wednesday night.
Yep.
unless Monty's been really coy and sort of keeping it quiet, and
which has happened before.
Yes, it has. But yeah, I think, to go back to the last time Hibs played Rangers, I know it was at Ibrox. I know that it was Philippe Clement's first match in charge of Rangers, but I kind of feel that the performance by Rangers and it wasn't. I don't think it was the worst Hibs have played under Montgomery. It wasn't a great performance, but there was still there were moments, and you thought, yeah, I can see what you're trying to do here. That's I can see what you're trying here. It's not worked out, but there is the intent is there, but I'm not sure what the phrase is. Almost like it spooked them a little bit, because I feel that performances up until then had been pretty good. Like, even if they weren't winning, or if they were conceding late goals and drawing rather than holding on for 3 points, it just seems like that. The nature of the defeat was almost like it's almost like it had sort of an effect on Montgomery, and he almost seems to be afterwards. The games that followed, he seemed to be a little bit more, not reserved, but maybe a little bit more cautious, just in terms of how he was playing. And obviously something like that happens. It's very easy to overthink it, and sort of. It's obviously it's possible to overthink it beforehand. If you think back to the Jude Lee Johnson's time in charge, when I think it was the first trip to Celtic, and I think he went with a slightly different formation and decided to start mostly kind of English-speaking players, and this was all something to do with communication. And they got horsed 6-1, and he made 4 subs at half time. And you think, well, you can't overthink these things. But I think what Hibs fans want to see is they just want to see the team competing. They want to see the team knocking the ball about with a bit more urgency. Obviously the style that Montgomery plays, it can be quite laborious. It can be quite sort of slow and ponderous. But you do that against a team like Rangers, and I think you are going to get punished. It might be that they find it easier to play against a team like Rangers, who aren't just going to sit back, who are going to be sort of pressing Hibs, or they are going to be sort of on the front foot, and that might actually get the best out of Hibs, or if not the best, at least something better than what we've seen in previous weeks. Because for me, one of the concerns is that Montgomery talked so much about fitness in Dubai. Talk of double sessions, triple sessions in some cases. And you would hope that having that time off to work on fitness and tactics, they come back and you could at least see sort of signs of that against Forfar. You wouldn't have seen too much, but you might have seen elements. But there was nothing. It was it was picking up where they'd left off, essentially, and that's the biggest concern for me. Obviously, you would hope that a game under the lights against Rangers would be enough to kind of coax a bit more out of them, and if it is more of a kind of first 11, then you would hope maybe there's a bit more kind of fluidity about the play, and a bit more kind of cohesion, because there wasn't a great deal of that up at Station Park on Saturday. So I think so long as we're able to compete, so long as it looks more like, I suppose, there's a plan in place rather than just kind of hoping for the best, knocking it around. The number of times the centre back stepped out on Saturday and could have pinged it to either wing and didn't. Just like, what's that about? I know it's windy. I know you want to sort of keep possession, but it was just something needs to change, I think. And I think the biggest concern as well, I think, is the fans are starting to turn a little bit. The booing at halftime, I'd expected there to be some jeering when the whistle went, but not as much as there was. And I think that's a fair indication of just how poor the fare on show was.
Yeah, we were very close proximity to it as well, so you could hear.
Yeah,
you could pretty much hear everything. I think you just talking there, about the centre half stepping out. I think shout of the afternoon did come from somewhere in the crowd behind me. I think when Paul Hanlon stepped out with the ball, and he got a quite aggressive instruction from somewhere behind me to just effing run at them, which I thought was a wee bit of a slightly harsh thing to ask of your 34-year-old centre half. But I think it was kind of, that was just a level of frustration that built with that first half, because it was just so. I think Montgomery did touch on it. They tweaked a few things tactically at halftime, and you could see that they were maybe getting into better areas afterwards. But I think you're right about the kind of mood and the fans camp at the moment. I think does that put a bit of extra pressure on going into this Rangers game, and that, you know, Hibs really need to show some sort of performance, because, as I said, it was, I think, you know, when they got a hiding at Ibrox, the following week against Celtic was much more, you know, organised, much more compact. And it was interesting. You kind of, you know, you touched on Montgomery maybe getting spooked a wee bit from that game at Ibrox. Almost looking back, it was, you know, it was maybe where we saw the end of, you know, Hibs looking like they could score maybe 2-3 goals in every game. Obviously, they didn't look much like that at Ibrox. Yeah, it was the kind of end of the honeymoon period. I don't know if they were maybe slightly less expansive in games after that, as if he thought, you know, maybe I need to rein it in a wee bit, because I think in those, you know, certainly up until those games, you know, you had, you know, Boyle and Yuan playing high and wide, and then it was, if I'm right in saying, it was almost after that Jair Tavares made his kind of way into the team, and he offers you maybe a wee bit more defensively. He's not as, you know, a kind of out and out, you know, get to the byline type winger. He's got kind of, you know, tendency to come inside, or he can go both ways. I think it was kind of interesting you pointed that out. There was a wee bit of a turning point, that Rangers game, in terms of, you know, what we were seeing from Hibs. But I suppose equally, you know, you got them at home. Nobody's expecting you to get a result. You know, this could equally be a kind of, if Hibs, you know, kind of turn up, put in a good performance, who knows what might happen. It could be a turning point in the other direction.
Yeah, it could be. And I don't think anyone really could have looked at how Hibs played against Rangers at Ibrox and thought they would get something from Celtic the following week. Yeah. Even though Celtic haven't had, like, you know, the greatest sort of run of results in Easter Road in recent seasons. You know, so there is obviously something there, and I think the frustration is that, like, fans aren't seeing enough of it, and whether that's on the players, whether it's on the opposition affecting how they play, you know, it could be anything. But, you know, there was a time when any time Hibs played Rangers, and it was under Alan Stubbs, it was under Neil Lennon, it was under maybe Jack Ross to a certain extent, but certainly not to the same level as it had been under the likes of, as I was saying, Stubbs and Lennon, where, you know, Hibs could go to Ibrox, they could host Rangers and really give it, like, everything. It was, you know, they were sort of more than a match. You know, they got the fair share of victories. You know, Hibs played Rangers and you thought, this is going to be kind of, you know, it could be another kind of 3-2 game. There could be 5 goals in this. There could be plenty of drama. There usually was. And it just feels like there hasn't really been much of that recently. And, you know, I think that's almost kind of playing on the fans' mind as much as, you know, kind of just the general kind of, I don't know what you call it, alarm maybe seems a little bit strong. Just the sort of general kind of dissatisfaction with how things are currently going. And, you know, I mean, obviously the Hibs are doing their press conference tomorrow to preview the game. Whichever players put up, you can imagine them say, you know, these are the sort of games that bring out the best in us, you know, big crowd behind us, under the lights, you know, playing Rangers. And, you know, great, yeah. So go out and do it. You know, like, it's a perfect opportunity, as you say, for Hibs to kind of, if not turn a corner, show that they've got something. And, you know, that's even though they will be missing, you know, like, key players. I mean, you would want someone like Martin Boyle playing against Rangers, especially with his history against them. And, you know, there's players who are injured, and you think, well, they could make a difference, or they have made a difference in the past. So, yeah, it's an opportunity for them to kind of exercise the ghosts of Saturday, please. You know, as you say, we're not going to speak of that again after this after this video ends. You know, but it is, you would hope that maybe like a return to league form and knowing what to expect will hopefully bring something better out of Hibs than what we've previously seen. That's the sort of optimistic view, I think. You know, there are plenty of factors you could say, well, you know, we're not expecting much from this because they are still missing players, and, you know, it's probably looking highly unlikely that they're going to be able to bring in anyone who can affect the squads between now and kickoff. Although, you know, you never know.
Who knows?
So yeah, I think a lot depends on what Rangers turns up and what Hibs turns up, to be honest. But
yeah,
you know, even just an improved performance, I think would probably, you know, buy a bit more kind of appreciation from the fans than than was maybe on display at Station Park. And, you know, I don't think you could really blame them for that.
No, not too much. But let's end it on that slightly more optimistic note that this is a big opportunity for Hibs to really kickstart their second half of the season. But we're going to leave it there for now. Thanks as always for joining us. If you're interested in hearing more from us through the week, please do consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. You get the details below there at Hibs Observer on YouTube. In terms of more content on the website through the week, Hibs will be doing the pre-match press tomorrow. But as far as today goes, we'll be hearing from Josh Campbell for the first time since he was ruled out with that ankle injury. So keep an eye on the website later tonight for updates on that. And yeah, we'll leave it there. Patrick, just want to say thanks very much for joining us, and we'll be back again soon.
Cheers.